Welcome to episode 300 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing my good friend and often writing partner, Nathan Ives. He was on before in episode number 18, so if you haven't listened to that, it might be worth checking out. I will link to that in the show notes. He just did a really cool documentary about artists who aren't super famous, but are making a living from their art. Hopefully you consider yourself an artist, so this topic is interesting to you. We talk about the making of the documentary as well as dig into some of the more philosophical issues around making a living as an artist. I thought this would be a great way of celebrating SYS's 300th episode. Nathan and I went to college together in North Carolina and moved out here in the mid-1990s. We actually sold our first script together, a film called Dish Dogs, which was produced in the early 2000s. So hopefully you'll find this interview as interesting as I did. And again, please do check out his excellent new documentary. I think most listeners of this podcast will get as much out of it as I did. Anyway, stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 300. I continually build out the SYS script library. We've got hundreds of screenplays and teleplays already in the library. The SYS script library is completely free. All the scripts are in PDF format, so you can download them and read them on whatever device you use. If you have a screenplay that you do not see listed in the script library, please do email those screenplays to me, and I will add them to the library. Again, the Selling Your Screenplay library, it's all just, community generated. People send me scripts. I post them in the SYS library. So, please do use this. It's a free resource. And again, if you see scripts that you have on your hard drive that we don't have listed in the library, just email them to me, info@sellingyourscreenplay.com, and I will add those to the library. I occasionally get script requests for specific scripts that I don't have in the library. In almost all cases, the person has done all the basic stuff, like Googling and poking around some of the other script resources. And of course, they've looked through the SYS script library and know that we don't already have it. So they will sometimes email and say, hey, can you find this script? Or do you know anyone I could contact to find this script? So before emailing me, please do look at those things. Do a basic Google search. Do poke around. But if you do have a script request, feel free to email that to me as well. And I'm thinking maybe I'll just announce it here on the podcast, and maybe someone will have that script. Recently, I had a writer ask for the Bringing Up Baby screenplay. So if you have that one, please do email it to me. And again, I will add it to the library and let this screenwriter know. So again, if you're looking for a specific screenplay, do a Google search, see if you can find it. Go to the SYS script library, see if it's there. If you don't see it listed, you can't find it, just drop me an email again, info@sellingyourscreenplay.com, and we'll see if we can continue to build the library and really find the scripts that people want. Anyways, if you want to check that out, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/library. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Nathan Ives. Here is the interview. Welcome, Nate, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Appreciate you being here.
So you were on episode number 18. I will refer people to that. We probably got in more to your backstory and stuff. We will skip that stuff today and go into your new project. You've just completed a documentary. So maybe to start out, you can just give us a logline or pitch. What is this new documentary all about?
So it's basically about, it's called Somewhere in the Middle, and it's about working artists who aren't household names, like they're not superstars, but they're making a legitimate living through their art. So they own a home, they raise a family, whatever like that. So they're not doing their art, doing some side job. It's their primary source of income.
So where did this idea come from?
I've been a Griffin House fan for some time. I discovered him on Spotify and went to a bunch of his shows, and eventually wound up sort of talking to him, talking about films and music and stuff. And we were chatting one day after a show, and he said, he was in New York, and he was playing at the City Winery in New York. It was a sold-out show, and I think the City Winery is like 400 or 500 people, so it's a decent-sized venue. And he said this happens all the time, but this couple came up to him after the show, and they were like, "Man, we just love your music, you know, we just think you're fantastic, and we just know you're going to make it someday." And, you know, and we both kind of laughed about it, but, I mean, Griffin has been making his living in music since he was 22. He's, you know, I think in his early 40s now. And, you know, he's got a house in Nashville, and he's got 2 kids and his wife, and it's their primary source of income. And, you know, it's so funny that people would say to him, you know, "We know you're going to make it someday," when, you know, he's living a life that, I mean, 99% of the world would probably kill to have. But in the eyes of a lot of people, he hasn't really made it. He's not a superstar yet. And so it really got me to thinking about what success means as an artist, and, you know, what does that mean? Is success only, are you only successful if you're a superstar, or are you successful if you're making a living for your family, or you're, you know, making a living for yourself, running around the country in a van, but you're happy doing it? And so I really wanted to explore that, and that's kind of what we did.
Perfect. So maybe you can just run through, so you have Griffin House as one of the artists. Maybe you can just run through quickly, who are the other artists that you have in the documentary?
Sure. We have Griffin House, who's a singer-songwriter. We have Aaron Tapp, who's a guitar player. He's currently a guitar player for Matt Nathanson and does a lot of his own work as well. We have a sculptor, Jeff Nishinaka. He's a paper sculptor. We have Jazika Nicole. She's an actress. Probably know her from Fringe and a bunch of other stuff. She's currently on The Good Doctor. And then lastly, we have a painter by the name of Dan McCall.
And perfect. And how did you actually find these artists? You just kind of described how you found Griffin House, and maybe you can even dive in a little bit deeper on that, because you know, it's not like you just went up to him the first time you met him and said, "Hey, you want to be in my documentary?" There was some sort of a relationship established. So maybe take us back, and what did that look like? Because didn't you have him do some songs in another movie? So that sort of established sort of a professional relationship.
Yeah, exactly. I sure did. So I did a movie called The New York Christmas, and that film, we needed a song for the sort of the final credits and that, and you know, it really was an important song for me because it was kind of bringing us out of the relationships in the film and into the credits, and, you know, sort of the finale. And so I reached out to Griffin and I said, you know, "Would you be willing to just write something for this film?" And he was, luckily. And so that really started us on a professional working relationship. And then, you know, after that, anytime he was in town, I would, you know, I'd go see his shows, of course, and we would, you know, sit after and chat and talk, and it just, you know, I wouldn't say we're necessarily friends, and we're not sending Christmas cards, but, you know, we see each other and chat and stuff like that. So that's really where that came from, is that relationship. Worked with him on the film.
Okay, so then, like, the paper artist, or the paper sculptor, how did you find some of these guys?
So the paper sculptor, the director of photography I've used on all my films, I used him on this, and he said, "Hey, I know this paper sculptor would be great." And so through Ken Stipe, the director of photography, he introduced me to Jeff Nishinaka, who is an incredible paper sculptor. I mean, if you Google him, you'll find it. And then Jeff said, "Oh, I think this is a great project. Maybe my friend Dan would be another good subject." And so he introduced me to Dan McCall, the painter. And so it was really sort of, you know, one to the next. And then Jazika Nicole, not unlike Griffin, I had worked with on another film, and so I reached out to her for that. And then Aaron Tapp, the final artist and musician, is, so I'm good friends with Matt Nathanson's tour manager, and Aaron Tapp is Matt Nathanson's guitar player. And so my friend said, "You know, Aaron, I think it would be great for this documentary if you're interested in, you know, interviewing him." And sure enough, I mean, I really loved what all of them had to say, but Aaron was definitely one of my favorites as far as just his candor and his funny way of looking at the world. So.
What kind of pushback did you get from any artists? Were there a bunch of artists that you reached out to that said no thanks? And was there any pushback from these? And I'm just asking because if there's someone that wants to approach these artists for any number of reasons, I'm certainly sure the woman that's on a TV show is very busy. She's probably getting requests for interviews all the time. What does it actually look like when you approach them?
Yeah, it was interesting. The one thing I was careful about, and I actually did about 8 interviews, I guess, and I kept 5. And luckily I didn't get a lot of pushback from the folks, but what I did do when I did the film is I went to them and said, "I'd like to use you for this documentary, but you'll have approval." So I didn't just say, "Sign here, sign this, you know, this agreement, and I can do whatever I want." I said, "Look, let me interview you, let me put the film together, I'll send it to you, and then you can sign the the contract or whatever. And so that I think was very helpful in making them more comfortable. They knew that I wasn't just going to take whatever it was and, misrepresent them or, cut pieces together that, they didn't mean what they said, that kind of thing. And luckily, when I sent the sort of the final edit, if you will, before I went at all the post work, they all approved it and enjoyed it. So.
Okay, and there were no notes from any of the artists?
There were definitely notes, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, there was, I'd say each one of them had a note or two. Luckily, nothing too extensive, but, I remember, one of the artists mentioned a company that he used to work with that he didn't work with anymore, and so he asked that we take that line out. Luckily it was sort of smaller stuff that wasn't the meat of the matter. It was sort of little things here and there. That, I'd rather you didn't say how much I make. Okay, fine, no problem. So these things, but luckily nothing of real substance.
And your plan is, since you had 8 artists and only really needed 5, your plan was if one of them just was complete, like just didn't want or whatever, you could just cut them out and make the documentary without them. Was that sort of the thinking?
That was sort of the thinking, but also I didn't, having not done a documentary before, I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I need 8 artists to really make this thing work or if I need 5. And I realized as I started putting it together and started, building that I probably would need about 5. But yeah, so for 2 reasons. One, so that I would have plenty of material, but secondly, I knew that, you might have an artist who didn't want to do it, or maybe the interview just didn't fit with what the documentary became, kind of thing. So
I gotcha. So in documentaries, you often see the credit written by. This is a podcast for screenwriters. So what does that actually mean? When you say you've written a documentary, what does that actually mean? Are you scripting things out beforehand? Are you coming up with an outline beforehand? That's part of the writing job. And then through the editing process, you actually piece it together. But maybe you can talk through that. You've written a lot of fictional scripts, so maybe you can kind of compare the two and just sort of tell us what that actually means to be a writer of a documentary.
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually thought about that too. And in the past, I've seen documentaries and thought written by. Well, you can write that. That's and it's funny. After doing one, I would say you do write it. Having written a good bit of narratives, you're taking, when you write a narrative, you're coming up with pieces of a story. You're coming up with characters. You're coming up with your structure, your dialogue, everything like that. And I would say it's a bigger undertaking to write a bigger undertaking to write a narrative script in some ways. With a documentary, you're basically given the pieces, and then you have to put it together. You have to structure it. You have to keep the pacing, going. So you definitely are writing. You're just given the information. I don't know how else to put it, but I, as I say, I used to think it's kind of ridiculous that you write a documentary, but no, I'd say now you definitely do. You have to structure. You have to write it. What's your theme? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to, all the things that you go through with a narrative script, you really go through with a documentary as well.
Was there ever any lines, so you're in your mind writing, was there ever any lines where somebody said something, but you thought, if he just said it a little bit differently? Like, is that part of the process, going to him and saying, hey, could you say it a little bit differently, or just trying to push people in a direction?
I really tried not to do that. I mean, I think I had 18 questions. I wanted to keep it fairly concise, knowing that they would probably, go in different directions from the questions. But no, I really wanted to keep it kind of true to who they were. So I think a couple of times I might have said, can you say that again? Because they might have stumbled over a line or something like that. But I really didn't try to push them in any direction. I just kind of said, let's go. And luckily they were all, I think one of the things that hopefully people will find from the documentary is they were all very candid and very honest and open. And I think that really is, if anything, makes it interesting. It's that.
So let's talk about the actual production. What does something like this actually need to go out, like just physically? What do you need to go do the interviews?
The interviews it was me and Ken and one production assistant.
Ken is the DP.
Sorry, Ken Stipe is the DP. And so it was really just the 3 of us. We were a 3-man crew. And I bought this little Tascam sound recorder. It was about $400, maybe $450 at Guitar Center. And I literally would just set it sort of, 3 or 4 feet in front of my subject on a deck of cards or something, so it was pointed up a little bit, and that was my sound. And amazingly, in some ways, I did one interview, and then I sent the sound files off to a buddy of mine who's a sound designer, and he put them in his machine and said, yeah, these will be fine, they'll need a little work. But so I really was just the 3 of us.
Okay, and then what kind of camera is Ken using?
Ken's using a Sony F30, I think. It's one of the, I think it's a couple of years old, sort of you know, definitely a professional grade Sony camera.
And what did the PA actually do? Like,
the PA was really there to, a few things, but help Ken with moving lights around and stuff like that. So we not only did sort of the interview, but we did a good bit of B-roll footage of, you know, like the artist painting, or, you know, we would do the guitar player playing, that kind of thing. And so, you know, there's a good bit of light moving, that kind of thing. The PA was really there to wrangle that stuff, you know, went and grabbed his lunch, that kind of thing.
I gotcha. And then on the post-production side, what do you need in terms of post-production to put this together?
You know, I was super lucky. So the Garrison, who produced this documentary with me, they're a post-production house, and I've used them on 2 of my films. I really like those guys. They're great. And just have had a good working relationship with them. So I approached them before I started, and I said, hey, would you guys be willing to go in with me on this? And we basically worked out a deal where I paid them, you know, a certain amount up front, then they reduce their overall fee, and then they get the first, I think $4,000 in money that comes in from the documentary, and that will complete their fee, and then they own 25% of the film. So the first $4,000 goes to them. Then I've got about 24, 25 in it. My wife and I financed the rest of it, so we've got about 25,000 in it. So the first 4,000 goes to them. The next 25,000 will come back to us, and anything past that, if we're lucky enough to be profitable, will be split 75% to Mule Films, which is my wife and I, and 25% to the Garrison.
Okay, so let's take a step back and just think about, you know, this sort of has philosophical implications. I mean, you're an artist, you're creating a documentary. So what lessons did you learn as an artist? Like, was there some things you took away from these guys that you said, wow, that's really poignant?
Yeah, without question. I mean, I think hopefully as people watch it, everybody will bring away something from it. But I think there's a lot of really great, like, just little nuggets of stuff here and there. Somebody will say something, you go, oh, of course. But I think overall, I think what people don't realize about being a working artist is that it is a job. And, you know, people say, oh, it's not a job. Oh, it's definitely a job. And, you know, and across the board, all of them, at some time or another, and sometimes now, have been doing art for other people. You know, they've been hired to paint a painting, or they've been hired to, you know, act in a film or a TV show, and you're not necessarily doing your own art. You know, you're doing art for someone else, and it's not that it's not enjoyable, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but it's not, I think, what people expect it to be, as far as you just, you know, sit down and you play what you want to play. And I think that's reserved for a very, very small fraction of superstars. I mean, I think probably the Rolling Stones go in the studio and they play what they want. I'm guessing. Just a hunch. I'm just guessing that's probably the case. But I think, you know, for that level, sure. I mean, you're kind of doing what you want. But everybody below that, so, you know, in the middle and somewhere in the middle, you know, sometimes sure they're doing their own art, but other times they're doing art for other people, and that's a very different thing than what I think a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, and that's a very poignant thing for screenwriters, because I think a lot of screenwriters go into this thinking, I'm just going to write my story and send it off. I'm going to be on the beach, send it off, and that's not really how screenwriting works either, is that most screenwriting is actually writing for a producer. They come with a book, they come with an idea, and you're actually just basically working for them.
100%. Or that you either hired to write something like that, as you say, you're writing for somebody else, so you're not really, you know, it's not your vision, it's not maybe something you really want to write, but you write it because you're getting paid to do it, or you've written something that you just think is you love and is really you and is great, and you sell it to a producer, and then that producer rewrites it, and then the director rewrites it, and then the craft services person rewrites it, and then just, you know, and by the time it's on the screen, you don't even recognize it, and, you know, that differently, but is, I would say, just as frustrating, if not more frustrating, than being hired to write something maybe you don't really want to write. And that's I have to say, having worked for about 2.5 years, the majority of my income was from writing and producing, and writing, producing stuff that some of it I liked, some of it I didn't, and I got to say, there's things that about, you know, we own a business now that's completely outside of the entertainment industry, and given the choice between working full-time writing for someone else and doing this other business, which is a boat salvage business, that I've always loved power boats and kind of got into that, but I got to tell you, given the choice between writing a script for somebody else and going down to our shop and, you know, tinkering around with boat motors and and doing that. I think I'd go tinker with boat motors. I don't know.
I'm right there with you. So were there any big surprises? You're interviewing these things. You go in with probably some ideas and stuff. Were there any surprises? Just things that just surprised you? Maybe not even to do with artists or anything else, but anything surprised just stands out?
Yeah, I think so. I think there were a few things. I think that I was surprised. I guess I kind of knew to some extent that it is a job and stuff like that. But I was surprised at how much each one of them, each one of the artists really hammered on that. That like it's it's a job. And the other thing that occurred to me, all of these artists had times when they were struggling artists, when they were working at restaurants, they were working here, working there. And one question I did ask was, what was the turning point of when you went from being a struggling artist to something happened and it went on to this, and they all could really specifically say, this is when I went from really being a struggling artist to making a living at it. And it was really interesting to hear. And I think everybody has that. Every working artist has that moment. But I think it's an important piece, because I think for those people who are still struggling, maybe still doing their art but having to do another job on the side to pay the bills or something like that, it hopefully gives us some inspiration or some hope, or there's this point, there's a moment. It's you work towards this thing, and it's not necessarily something that it's not something you plan, but it's something you just keep working toward your art, and then the world happens around you, and something happens that you move on. I mean, one of the best examples was that Jessica Nicole, who has been a very successful working actor for some time. She was in New York. She was working as a receptionist, and she thought, I'm not in New York to work as a receptionist, so she quit her job, and she was, just trying to find anything she could find acting-wise to make some money. She was stealing money from her roommate's laundry jar to buy something off a 99-cent, Wendy's menu, and she saw an audition in Backstage West for Bigfoot the Musical, and she was like, boy, beggars can't be choosers. So, she goes to the Bigfoot the Musical audition. She gets it. And it's it's this 2-week run of this very off Broadway thing, and she's in the chorus and has one line in the whole thing, and she's singing. Well, she does that, and then a month later, after it's all done, she gets a call from somebody who was in the audience. And they were like, a friend of mine is doing this play, and we think you'd be great for the lead. And would you mind if I passed on your information? Well, sure enough, she goes and auditions for this thing, and it's a pretty big, not huge, but a pretty big production. And she gets it, and then from that, she got an agent, a manager, and things really took off. And she says in the documentary, she kind of jokes. She says, I like telling that story because it would have been real easy not to go to the Bigfoot the Musical audition. But had she not gone to that, who knows? And I think it's an important point.
When I watched it, it was amazing how just persistent and committed these people were. And they were willing to go through a lot of tough times to try and get to the other side. And just as you say, there was a lot of hardship and just struggling that all these artists went through. And that should not be forgotten, that's going to be part of the process.
Without question. And also that those hard times and frustrations continue. I think one of the things that really came out of it too was how really cyclical being a working artist can be. And I think Jeff Nishinaka really said it best. He said, there have been years that I've made $20,000, and the next year I'll make $200,000, and then for 3 years I'll make $30,000. And he's like, the one good year will pay all the credit card debt that I had from the 3 bad years before that. And it is very cyclical. You have to be a certain kind of person to be able to do that, and it's not easy.
Yeah. Do you think these artists, like you keep sort of saying, well, there's this sort of superstar level. Do you think these artists are still ambitious and still trying to reach that superstar level? Is that a part of the equation, or is a guy like Griffin House, is he kind of okay being sort of a B-level rock star or whatever?
I think that it's interesting. And I guess when you ask what really surprised me, I was a little surprised at how content they all seemed. And that's not to say that they didn't want to grow as artists, and perhaps, I'm sure Griffin would love to play in front of 2,000 people instead of 500 people. But overall, these 5 artists were genuinely pretty content, I think, with what they had achieved and where they are in their lives. And that was a little bit of a surprise, because I think it's sort of cliche to think that, you know, everybody wants to be a superstar. And again, it's not that they weren't driven or wanted to, you know, grow as artists and so forth, but yeah, they were surprisingly content, I think.
So, making this documentary, would you have some tips for aspiring artists? Like, if someone comes to you, after seeing this documentary, someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, watch your documentary, I really love it. What should I do? What's a tip for me?" They're at the beginning stages of this journey.
Yeah, and it was a question I asked all 5 of the artists at the end of the documentary, and I'll leave their answers for them to watch it. But you know, I think, boy, it's funny they're trying to question around on me, but I would say a few things. I would say that you really have to, as an artist, understand that I think if you want to be an artist who is completely true to his or herself and only does the art they want to do, and whatever that is, it's a painting, it's a script, it's a film, it's a song, if you're trying to make a living at it with that attitude, you have about a 1 in, I want to say 10 million chance of making that happen. So you're saying I got a chance. Exactly. Just because I think that, I would say as a aspiring artist, if you're really lucky, you'll wind up somewhere in the middle, like these artists. You know, you're making a living at it, but you're probably going to do a good bit of stuff that maybe isn't your favorite thing, or something you'd rather not do, but you need to pay your mortgage, you need to support your family, you need to support yourself. So I would say, more than anything, as an aspiring artist, be realistic with where you might wind up if you're lucky. You know, not that you shouldn't shoot for the stars, you absolutely should, and perhaps you have the talent to do that. But be realistic with your goals, and I think really, maybe more than anything else, I would say a lot of hard work, a lot of, you know, just hard times. But perhaps the best advice I could give would be, whatever your chosen area of art is, find people who are making a living with that type of art, and reach out, email them, just say, you know, and say, "Hey, I'm an aspiring sculptor, and I know that you're making a living at it, and I would love to hear you know, your take on it, and maybe give me some advice." I would be willing to bet that at least half the people you reach out to will probably get back to you and say, you know, "Here's my story," or maybe we can jump on the phone or something like that. Because I really think that's the most important thing, is to talk to people who are doing it.
So, and this is a conversation you and I have had as friends, you know, numerous times, about that sort of balancing act between, you know, I won't say business, but between you as an artist doing what you creatively want to do, and then, you know, doing work for other people. Did this change your perspective at all, going through that? I mean, because this is part of the thing. I mean, you're literally an artist making a documentary, so it's a sort of meta thing. You're going into this trying to create a documentary, obviously to make money. There's sort of a practical side. Has it changed your perspective? What are you going to do on your next project? Has this documentary maybe given you a pivot or some insight into how you should approach things as an artist?
It definitely, no, it most definitely has. And I think the most important thing it did for me, you know, having done both, having done projects that were, you know, I did It's Not You, It's Me, it was the first film I directed. And, you know, for all its shortcomings, I'm still very proud of it. But it was very, you know, I wrote it, I directed it, I raised the money for it, so it was my project. And, you know, after that I did projects for other people, and that was fine as well for different reasons. But I think after doing this, I mean, I'm in a fortunate situation because I don't have to rely completely on my art, my filmmaking, to make a living. I think more than anything, after doing this, I realized that before I go into any project, I really need to step back and figure out why I'm doing it and if it's worth it for me. And, you know, and that's not to say that somebody comes and says, you know, I want you to direct this movie or write this movie for me, and maybe I'm not crazy about it, but they're going to pay me money to do it, and that's going to, you know, go into my kid's college fund, or it's going to go into, you know, a family trip or something like that. I may not want to, it may not be something I want to write, but I can say, okay, but it would be great to have that money. And that's the reason I'm doing it. Because I think if I go into it with that with that idea. This is why I'm doing this project. It will really help me to, do the project and not feel like, well, I hate this, or this is terrible, or I don't want to be doing this, or anything like that. No. I signed up to do it. Here's why I signed up to do it. And I'm very clear on why I'm doing it. And, there will be other projects that are all mine again, and I'll say, I'm doing this, and I know it may or may not be profitable. I know there's a good chance it won't be profitable, but I'm doing it because it's something that I really feel that I want to do, and something that I would be proud of, and it's an area that I want to explore.
And I wonder, and now we're just spitballing here. This is just something that occurs to me. I wonder how much of it is age, because I find myself in a similar situation where I go on the podcast every week and basically tell people, you got to be a little bit practical. Think about the marketplace, think about the genre you're doing, think about some of those business decisions as you're writing your script, and it's sort of a balancing act. But I wonder how much of it is age. I think maybe in your 20s, maybe into your 30s, you might be a little more up for writing a producer's script. As now, I don't know, I don't spend any time trying to get producers to hire me to write their script. If someone comes to me and it falls in my lap, I might take that on, but some of that is just purely age, because back in the day, I would see leads, producer has a book and they want someone that's just I don't even respond, I don't even try and contact those producers. But maybe how much of it is age, how much of it is just your place in life? Would you recommend something different for someone really younger? And I'm getting this because I go on the podcast every week and I'm real practical, and I'm telling people, but there is that sort of fine line, and where is that line between doing what you don't want and doing what you do want? And how much of it do you think is just the perspective you now have with age?
I think a lot of it has to do with age, but I think, I guess I'm
sorry, keep going.
I guess I feel fortunate. I mean, my life was a roller coaster and topsy-turvy for years, and then I got married when I was 42, and that just changed a lot, and I'm more content than I've ever been. And I think in my 20s not 20s into my 30s, I think I was so attached to, achieving that greatness, to give myself some identity. If I could just make this film, that if I could just win an Oscar, it would give me an identity, and people would like me, and I would be, it would be there. And after being married and having kids, my family's really my identity. And I feel very comfortable and very happy in that. And it has freed me to, I guess as I said earlier, back up and really make decisions on the art I do. And so, yeah, I think definitely a lot of it is age, but I can also see somebody in their 20s and who is, whether it's a family or it's something else that has given them some grounding and has given them some self-assurance, finding that same thing.
Yeah, and I wonder because we've taken some of those hard knocks, and so it galvanizes sort of our thinking on that. Because we went through exactly that with Dish Dogs, and this is a good story. We optioned the script. The option basically had lapsed, and the producers had not paid us to extend it, and we knew they had completely rewritten the script. So at that point, legally, we could have just pulled the rug out from under, and you and I had that conversation. Should we take the money? We were in our 20s. Should we take the money, let them bastardize the script, take the money, or get the script back and persevere? And there was very little, we had that discussion, but there was very little discussion. We basically just said, let's take the money. We get a credit, we get the money, but we knew the movie wasn't going to, good, bad, whatever. We knew it was going to be our movie.
Right.
We knew at that point it was rewritten. And looking back on it, I've never really regretted it. I don't look back on that and regret it. It was demoralizing, but it was, and to be honest with you, looking back on it now, it wouldn't have changed our lives at all if we'd have turned that down. If we'd have taken the script out, truthfully, it really wouldn't have had that big of an impact on our lives. But at the time, it seemed huge. We were so proud of ourselves to write the script, option it, and then ultimately sell it. And so we knew it was going to be produced. I think that was another big factor. We knew that, yes, we could take the script back, but we also knew that they were going to actually produce it. So we were going to get the money and have a produced credit. Taking some of those hard knocks, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing in your 20s, so that you actually get to that point where you have that perspective.
I couldn't agree more, and I think those, the hard knocks and the ups and the downs and being broke and the, all that stuff, it does build who you are, and it gives you some appreciation too when you do get to do a small documentary that you really love and you really enjoy, and it's something that you want to do. I mean, if also I think something I've learned from this is just just the true joy of exploring something that's important to you. It's an important subject to me because I am an artist, and I've at times been a working artist, and to be able to explore that without outside noise of people saying, oh, we'll do it like this or do it like that. You've got to do it like this or do it like that. There's a real just joy to doing a project like this that is just, it's you. And someday my kids will watch this hopefully and go, wow, this is what a neat project.
So let's talk about distribution and festivals. Did you enter some film festivals with this? We
did. We entered, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 festivals. We've been turned down by 5 so far, so we'll see where that goes. I kind of went higher mid-level festivals. That might have been a mistake. I sort of shot for the festivals that have been around for 20 or 30 years and are in bigger cities and stuff like that. And so I have such mixed feelings about festivals. I think they have value, but from a distribution standpoint or from making money, I don't know that they hold a lot of value unless it's the top tier.
Yeah. And so how did you ultimately find your distributor?
Well, actually, so I'm self-distributing, so okay. We don't have a distributor. So what we decided to do, and having been through a number of films with distributors and so forth, I'm sure there are good distributors out there, I'm sure of it, but I haven't found it. so with the amount of money we have in this project, which isn't much, I mean, we have, I think, right around $25,000 in the entire project. I kind of thought, I'd rather hold on to the distribution rights, and so we'll release it October 8th. We'll release it on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, and I think one other platform as well. And then we've hired a PR company, and we're going to do about 2 months of PR around the film. Getting on podcasts like this and doing written interviews and things like that. And my hope is that, and I'll probably do some Facebook ads and that kind of thing as well. But my hope is that because the budget's so small, and because Amazon is such a huge platform, that we can, we can be profitable. And I'd be more than happy to come back on in 6 months or so, and I can tell you if I am or not.
So I'd just like to wrap up the interviews just to get some recommendations. These are just anything you've seen lately, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, at the theater. Just what's something that you've seen that you think screenwriters would, maybe something a little under the radar that screenwriters would get something out of? Anything in the last year or two you've seen that you really liked?
Yeah, unfortunately, having 2 small kids, I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I haven't seen a lot of movies. Yeah, but and it's not under the radar by any stretch of the imagination. But I went and saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I really loved it. I mean, I like Tarantino. I'm a fan, and I'm always amazed at how well he can. I mean, he'll have 25-minute scenes that are riveting. I mean, you just can't take your eyes away. And it's just these long, drawn-out scenes, and he just, he's able to piece these things together, and he just does things that I just think, how did he get away with that? Like, how did he make that work? And it does. It works beautifully, and I just, I'm guessing Tarantino is one of those artists who he does what he wants to do, and he does it very well, I might add. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. That was really great.
Perfect. So. How can people follow you? That's my final question. Twitter, Facebook, a blog, a website, anything you're comfortable sharing, I'll round up for the show notes. You can tell us that now.
Yeah, it'd be great. www.mulefilms.com is the best place. And for the documentary, would love, one of the big things with Amazon is the reviews and the likes or the rating it. So if people would order, I think it's going to be $3.99 on Amazon. If you order on Amazon and leave us a review, whether you liked it or didn't like it, I'd just love to hear honest reviews about the film. Please do that. But yeah, www.mulefilms.com, and thank you very much.
Perfect. Well, Nate, I appreciate you coming in and doing the interview. Good luck with this film, and good luck with all your future films.
Thanks so much.
I just want to talk quickly about SYS Select. It's a service for screenwriters to help them sell their screenplays and get writing assignments. The first part of the service is the SYS Select Screenplay Database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre, and then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays they want to produce. Dozens of producers are in the system looking for screenplays right now. There have been a number of success stories come out of the service. You can find out about all the SYS Select successes by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Also on SYS podcast episode 222, I talked with Steve Deering, who was the first official success story to come out of the SYS Select database. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the screenplay database along with all the other services that we're providing to SYS Select members. These services include the newsletter. This monthly newsletter goes out to a list of over 400 producers who are actively seeking writers and screenplays. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in this monthly newsletter. We also provide screenwriting leads. We have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads services, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These leads run the gamut. There's producers looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. They're looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots, all types of projects. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. Also, you get access to the SYS Select forum, where we will help you with your logline and query letter and answer any screenwriting related questions that you might have. We also have a number of screenwriting classes that are recorded and available in the SYS Select forum. These are all the classes that I've done over the years, so you'll have access to those whenever you want once you join. The classes cover every part of writing your screenplay, from concept to outlining to the first act, second act, third act, as well as other topics like writing short films and pitching your projects in person. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that is sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing another good friend of mine, Bernie Rayo. He's a talented Portuguese filmmaker who's been living mostly in New Zealand over the last few years. The more astute listeners of this podcast will notice that Bernie was also the cinematographer on my film, The Pinch. That's actually how we met, and we will talk briefly about how we got introduced to each other and ultimately form this friendship and continue to stay in touch today. And it's always just fun to have people that I know come on the podcast, and it's even more interesting. They come through a publicist. Both Nate and Bernie, they had a publicist. They were using a publicist, and actually those publicists, they contact me because I'm on their list just through the podcast. That's how I get a lot of the interviews, is from these various publicists. So it's just always fun when one of the publicists sends me an email from a filmmaker that I actually know, and I'm always happy to have these filmmakers on. He just did a short, quirky horror film. I'm not sorry, it's not a short film. He just did a quirky feature horror film called Killer Sofa. He's a real do-it-yourselfer filmmaker, has lots of insight for us. He really is, from top to bottom, excellent writer, excellent filmmaker, so he can give us a lot of interesting information and a lot of insight. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.